Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name, as I said a couple of minutes ago, is Pedro Alvarez. I'm recruitment officer at the IAEA, and I have the pleasure to be facilitating or coordinating the recruitment workshop, the session for today. So before we start with the presentation per se, I would like to run you through a few, let's say, rules or ways of the way we're going to actually be operating and a little bit of the expectations of this session. So at the end of the session, we will have a round of questions and answers. So please, and that's very, very important, that you use the question and answer functionality at the bottom of the right-hand side of your screen. Please don't use the chat functionality, especially if you use it privately, because we will not be able to see your questions. So please use only the Q&A functionality to submit your questions. Yeah, as we have a pretty large audience, please remain muted. So keep your microphone muted throughout the whole session. Otherwise, it will be really a mess to keep it like reasonably understandable for everyone. So also, if you want to optimize the quality of the audio, we recommend you that you use a headset. And also, finally, the workshop will be recorded. So yeah, so if you've joined in the middle of it, or if you need to review some of the aspects that will be shared today, then you will have the chance to do that reviewing the recording. I would also like to remind you that a survey is being submitted to all of you at the end of each of the sessions. I've been told that this survey is not coming from an IAEA email address. It's actually coming from a Gmail email address. So please make sure that you check your junk mail if you haven't received this survey, if you have participated in the previous sessions, and also if you want to receive the survey for the next for this section and the next ones. Yeah, this is the first time we're conducting these kind of workshops over the web, over this web-based platform. So we welcome all your feedback, and any ways you can think of improving the presentation and the way this workshop is conducted will be very much welcome. So now let's jump to the agenda for today. So today session is basically going to consist of a panel discussion from U.S. nationals at the IAEA. So the session will actually be facilitated by Janae Armstrong, and also we will have a different panel discussion on live after the IAEA, so facilitated by Steve Amundson of some of your co-nationals who have joined IAEA and have come back to work in your country afterwards. And afterwards, finally, we will have the question and answer session. Please use the question and answer functionality to submit your questions. Okay, so I'm now passing the floor to Janae. So Janae, all yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro. I'm just sharing my screen. Okay. Hope everyone can, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Janae Armstrong. I lead the IAEA Careers Program at Argonne National Laboratory, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction on our program. The IAEA Careers Program at Argonne encourages well-qualified Americans to join the agency's professional staff and non-safeguards departments and assists interested candidates in applying to those positions. So you can check out our website there. There's also the International Safeguards Project Office at Brookhaven National Laboratory, which supports well-qualified Americans to join the agency's professional staff and safeguards departments. And Steve Amundson, for the second panel, you'll hear from him who works there. 10 to 12% of staff at the agency are from the United States, depending on the year, it varies a bit. IAEA Careers recruits US-sponsored cost-free expert positions, junior professional officer positions, and internships in non-safeguards departments at the agency. So the Argonne National Laboratory, the IAEA Program Office, has some sponsored internships. These last for 1 year, usually start in the fall or the summer of each year and last for a year. There's approximately 6 positions posted per year, and they include a stipend to cover basic costs as well as a flight to and from Vienna. There are a few of those open on our website now under the internships tab, in case you or someone you know is interested. We also offer junior professional officer positions. These are for US citizens and gives them an opportunity to temporarily join the agency's workforce in order to gain work experience in an international environment and learn specialized skills they can bring back to the United States. These assignments generally last 1 to 2 years, and we offer approximately 6 to 10 positions per year. You must be 32 years old or under to apply and hold a university degree. Also, you must be fluent in English, and if you know an agency, a UN language such as Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, or Spanish, I would be sure to emphasize that in your application. As I mentioned, a few junior professional officer positions in international relations and science are also open currently on our website. We also offer cost-free expert positions, which are sponsored by the United States to provide additional expertise in specific fields and work as supplemental staff with highly specialized skills. These positions generally last for 2 years, and they are at the P3 to P5 levels, and they do not include managerial or supervisory tasks. These are open to US candidates. In addition, we have a Repatriate Career Network. So if you go and work at the agency for a few years, up to 7 years, and you're repatriating back to the United States, we have a network of national laboratories and some private sector companies that would be interested in receiving your resume and getting in touch with you. So if that is the case, please reach out to us at iastaffing@anl.gov. And if you are at a company that would be interested in receiving resumes of Americans that have worked at the agency returning to the US, you can subscribe on the Careers tab, RCN, Repatriate Career Network, to our alerts at IAEA programs. How can our office help you? We provide personalized field-specific job alerts on a weekly basis. So once you sign up, if the job fits your background, an IAEA job or a US funded position, you would receive it in your email inbox. We share tips for applying and interviewing, as well as I'm happy to look at your application before you apply and help you prepare or do a mock interview. We also track applications through the selection process. And we offer networking opportunities through our LinkedIn group. It's called Americans at IAEA. We have over 1,000 members, so feel free to join us there on LinkedIn. We provide information for Americans transitioning to Vienna. So without further ado, I'd like to begin our panel discussion today on working at the IAEA. Again, thank you for joining. If you joined now, I'm Janae Armstrong. I'm at Argonne National Laboratory, the IAEA's Careers Program. And I formerly worked as a junior professional officer, seated in HR as an analyst on gender equality at the agency. So I will be your facilitator today. We're so glad to have you, and we have a wide array of staff working at the agency, both junior professional, mid-career, and senior level. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves today so you can hear their voice and get familiar with them as we move along in this discussion. So first off, I'll pass the baton off to Lisa Stevens. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Janae. I'm Lisa Stevens, and I'm the director of the Division of Program of Action for Cancer Therapy, which we call PACT here at the agency. And I'm in the Department of Technical Cooperation. And I've just completed my first year here at the agency. So I'm looking forward to telling you more about my journey and give some tips. So I'll turn it over to Alex.
Hi, my name is Alex Enders. I'm a senior project engineer here within the Department of Safeguards. I worked for a long time in nuclear security, most recently at Oak Ridge National Lab for 8 years. And then I've been here on the project engineering team within Safeguards for the past 2 years. We help to manage and execute large Safeguards projects like things going on in Chernobyl. There's a major upgrade project in Canada, and help manage other high profile or significant projects for the Safeguards community. Yeah, and I'll talk more about what my experience has been later on. And with that, I'll pass it over to the illustrious Andrew Bromnick.
Well, thank you for that illustrious introduction, and good morning to everybody back in the US. My name is Andrew Bramnick. I am the Emergency Response Training Officer for the IAEA's Incident and Emergency Center, which is situated within the agency's Department of Nuclear Safety and Security. And I've been in this role for about 6 years, since October of 2014, after serving with the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission for about 9 years in a mix of responsibilities from health physics inspections to emergency response. So I look forward to talking with you all today, and I will turn it over lastly, but certainly not least, to my colleague Reagan.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Regan Almer. I'm a junior professional officer and associate partnership and implementation officer in the Department of Nuclear Applications. I work specifically with the Renewal Project, which is the renovation of our nuclear applications laboratories in Cybersdorf. I look forward to any questions you have about working in Cybersdorf or at the IAEA in general. Thank you so much, and I'll turn the floor back to Janae.
Thanks, Reagan. So first off, we'd like to discuss your professional paths and how that's going, how you got here. So first off, what brought you to work at the agency? I'd like to call on Lisa Stevens.
Great, thanks again, Janae. So as I mentioned in the introduction, I've been at the agency now 1 year. And prior to that, I was at the US National Cancer Institute, which is part of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And I was at the NCI for 24 years, serving in various roles. My last role was as Deputy Director of our Center for Global Health. And in that job, I actually had the opportunity to work with the division that I now lead here at the agency. So I did national cancer control plans from the US National Cancer Institute, and again, partnered very closely not only with PACT, but also with WHO, IARC, and other international partners that had a role in national cancer control planning. And so when the position became open to lead the division of PACT, I was very enticed to consider that as the next step in my career. And I applied and went through the process, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is what brought me to the work of the agency, was knowing the specific group that I would eventually lead. Over.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And what about you, Andrew?
Well, thanks, Janae. And this is a great contrast because unlike Lisa, I actually didn't have a lot of exposure to the IAEA in my previous work. I spent 9 years with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, primarily from the Region 3 office in the Chicago suburbs. And I was working mainly as a health physics inspector and an emergency response specialist. So I was interested in really broadening my exposure in the international affairs while diving deeper into the field of emergency preparedness and response. So I learned about the agency and actually applied to a position with no prior connection or experience working with the IAEA. And although I didn't wind up getting that position, it did lead to a sort of a consultant or short-term contract opportunity. That was with a different HR process, which I don't want to go into in great detail, but the opportunity to work here for 6 months as a consultant, as well with the Incident and Emergency Center, really helped me to learn a lot about what the IAEA is and how it operates, and that eventually, I feel, put me in a good place to apply for the position I'm in now about a year later. So that's the short version of how I wound up at the agency.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And what is it like on your day-to-day working at the agency? Alex, Enders?
Sure. I would characterize, and I can speak to my limited 2-year experience here within safeguards. I would characterize safeguards as silos of geniuses. There have been some absolutely brilliant, elegant solutions devised to secure nuclear material in the facilities. But it's interesting, just because you know one facility or you know one technology, it only gives you a little bit of understanding into the other facilities. Safeguards is very specialized and a very unique application of radiation detection, and rightly so. And working here gives me the opportunity to really understand the intersection of nuclear facility operations and safeguards from top to bottom. How do we implement safeguards in a manner that does not affect operations or minimizes the impact on operations? And also have to recognize that just because we have a solution devised for country X, it is not the same as the solution that we may devise for country Y, because their facility and their laws are set up so much differently. Also, here at the IAEA, there's a lot of freedom of work and there's a lot of individual responsibility. There are no charge codes. There is no job task thing you have to fill out every day saying you worked X hours on this project. And everyone has a fair degree of autonomy. But also understand that getting things accomplished here requires about 3 times more work than you think it should, because there are so many interested parties in various activities, and it seems like everybody has veto power. So there's a lot of negotiation and there's a lot of discussion that goes on. But thankfully, the Europeans have a way to get around that, which is the age-old phrase of, hey, let's go get a coffee. And it enables a lot of discussions to take place over many, many, many coffees. And that's about it.
Great, thank you, Alex. Reagan Elmer, what is it like for you working at the agency?
Thanks, Janae. So my position, as I mentioned before, is in Cybersdorf. That means I have a bit more of a commute than most of my colleagues working at headquarters. So I live in Vienna, but commute out 45 minutes to our nuclear applications laboratories in Cybersdorf, Austria. To me, it is every day more inspiring than the next. I get to be surrounded by the brightest minds of nuclear science. As I came from a background that was much more politically focused, this was a new opportunity for me to learn an entirely new field. So I always joke with my colleagues out there that they've given me another degree, because I've had to really understand terminology and nuclear applications that were 2 years ago very foreign to me. But I think that the community out there is so inspiring, and everyone is so dedicated to their craft that they are always overjoyed to share the new project that they're working on. And obviously our department works with everything from food and agriculture applications all the way to human health. So it's been truly a tremendous journey over the last 2 years, being able to learn from my colleagues out there as I kind of implement my job with the renewal project. Thank you.
Thank you, Reagan. That sounds exciting. So moving on to some career insights. What were some of the challenges you overcame? However you'd like to answer that, applying to the agency or when you got there in your move. Reagan, why don't we continue with you?
Sure. So I originally am from quite a small town in central Illinois, actually. And so one of the challenges was just adapting to city life. Fortunately, I love it, I have to say. Vienna is always ranked as the top city to live in the whole world. So it was not a very difficult transition, but it did take some getting used to, I think. The transition was made a bit easier. I went to graduate school here in Vienna, so I had a year in the city before I actually started working at the agency. But the transition to overcome a language barrier, learn German while I was here, and kind of facilitate my life transition into a new city, I would say was one of the challenges. Thank you.
Great. What about you, Alex Enders?
Reagan, it's interesting to hear you tell that story. Moving my family to Vienna was the hardest single project I've ever undertaken in my life. Just because the act of unentangling yourself from your old job, selling 2 cars, getting all this stuff out of my house and getting it ready for rental, blah, 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 blah. It was just this crazy run around, your hair's on fire, a couple of months. but it is also the best thing I could have done for my family. So moving here was a challenge, but if you can reach out to any colleague that have done it before or already here, they can help you out tremendously. As far as the work goes, kind of like Regan was saying, the first challenge I encounter is communication. Now, that said, everyone's English here is besser als mein Deutsch, or Spanish, better than my German, so I give them credit for that. But the opportunities for miscommunication here are legion. You can't possibly be clear enough or repeat something enough times, because invariably somebody will come, you get to step 10 in your project, and they come and say, hey, wait a minute, what about step 2? I didn't understand that. So thus underscoring the need that I talked about before to, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee and talk about it. So the Europeans do a good job at enabling that. Also, another challenge I've had to overcome here is the understanding that the IAEA is not necessarily the master of its own domain. For at least in safeguards, when we want to upgrade existing equipment, that's actually okay. If it's just an upgrade, we can do that. But to install new equipment or to change or alter or improve the way of doing things requires a lot of coordination and consultation. The facility operators have their own schedule. And at the operator level, there's not always a lot of impetus to work with the IAEA. At the ministerial and high government levels, sure, they love working with the IAEA, but when you say, hey, rather than doing your current process, can you do this current process with an extra little twiddle on it? And that takes some negotiation. So you have to be excruciatingly careful and complete when working at the operational level. Lastly, the final challenge I had to overcome, like I've mentioned before, is I had to learn to like really dark coffee, which I'm glad to say I accomplished. And those are my big challenges for getting to the IAEA.
Great, thank you, Alex. Seems like you've transitioned very well. So moving on, could you share with us any decision you had to make to help your career move forward? I'll call in Andrew Bromnick.
Thanks again, Janae. I really like this question because in my case, a decision I had to make was to really take the leap. What I mean by that is, I mentioned earlier, I had a job at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that I really enjoyed, a fantastic place to work. And the opportunity to come to Vienna wasn't in the form of a fixed term contract for 3 years with the possibility to extend to 7. It was for a 6-month consultant's position with the possibility of maybe being extended to 1 year or possibly 2. So the way that the opportunity unfolded for me, again, it's an HR process that doesn't exist, although consultants still exist. But it took really putting myself out there and working with the management at the NRC regional office. Eventually, this was an activity they supported, but it involved, from their perspective, an employee to separate, go away, and then come back. And how is that going to really enhance radioactive materials inspections or the HR work and the time and effort involved to doing it? But to the second part of this question, how did it help to move my career forward? I feel like without that experience, I would not have been in as good of a place to then apply for and get an opportunity to work here on a fixed term contract, which is now coming up, as I said, on its 6th year. So if you have the flexibility and the support from your management, from your family, I would offer to everybody, do consider looking at, consultant posts, junior professional officer roles, or cost-free expert jobs if you do find one that fits your skills and experience. It is a little bit different as far as the HR process and the compensation and benefits. I'm not the best person to talk to about those. But as an opportunity to learn about the agency and to really push a career forward, it's something not to take off the table if that works for you.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Lisa Stevens?
Yes, thank you, Janae. So I'll also answer in a similar vein to Andrew, although my approach will be different in terms of the leap of faith. So one of the things I didn't mention in my long career at the U.S. National Cancer Institute was I also did my graduate work there. And I have a PhD in molecular biology, which at the very first in coming to the agency, I felt like a fish out of water. But it's amazing how many other molecular biologists I've actually found on staff here. And so what I would say is, in addition to taking that leap that Andrew's very well described, I would say it's building a network. And I think the network that I had at the Cancer Institute, and again, as I said, I'd worked closely with PACT before I actually came to the agency, that I'm looking to build a network here within the agency and see how best to both integrate my skill set here, but also to draw on the expertise you've heard with the other panelists, a wealth of backgrounds and expertise. And there are the best in their field here. And so really how to draw those experts together to be able to move the work forward. I think the other unique aspect of the job here within PACT is that we do have that role interfacing with other UN entities in order to be able to do the comprehensive cancer reviews that we support within member states. And again, having that network really helps in that regard. So whether it's through platforms like this or through partnerships or when you go to meetings, to be able to interface and build that network, I think that really does help to move a career forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So now we'd like to hear from Alex Enders about any career advice you may have for those applying.
Sure. Just to start off with a caveat, my career advice, or the sample size of my career is exactly 1. So there's some uncertainty associated with that measurement. That said, I have 2 pieces of advice. Number 1, be patient. It was approximately 2 years from when I first heard about the job position opening that I'm in now. It took 2 years from when I first heard about it until when I landed in Vienna. That's longer than normal, but not unheard of. So it does move slowly. The IAEA is not a profit-driven organization, nor does it operate like one. Number 2, be clear and honest with yourself about what you hope to accomplish during your time at the IAEA. And it can be some very good things. And it's going to be mentioned later, if you do come to the IAEA, talk to your current employer or desired future employer about how your experience at the IAEA will benefit you upon your return. Like, hey, I'm going to go do this assignment abroad for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then try and plant the seeds about how your experience here is going to better prepare you for landing upon your return. So such as it is, a career coach I am not, but those are the 2 pieces of advice I would give for now.
Thanks, Alex. And what do you think, Lisa Stevens? What's your career advice for those interested in applying?
Yeah, so this is my first job with the UN, and it sounds like maybe some of the other panelists have that as well. I will say, though, that the years I spent with the US government did prepare me for some of the bureaucracy that I have encountered with the UN. And so that's been helpful for me. So again, I also would say to approach it with an open mind. I mean, Alex made some points that I can resonate with in terms of patience and understanding there's a process. But it's really that structure, which if you're coming from the private sector or perhaps even academia, it may be quite shocking to you. But I did have one of the HR people tell me early on, we don't want to send you the HR manual because we don't want to scare you. And I said, look, I've worked in the government for many, many years. You can't scare me. It did slightly scare me still, but it's all good. So that's what I'd say is it's a different system. And the folks I encounter who have worked in many different agencies across the UN, it's just amazing the breadth of expertise and the experiences that folks have had that they bring to the job here.
Great, thank you, Lisa. All right, last but not least, let's talk about living in Vienna. What is it like and what's your favorite part of living in Vienna? I'm going to call on you again, Lisa.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, I could take up all the rest of the time and talking about this. And again, some of my colleagues have mentioned a few of these things, but I will say that I moved 2 teenage boys and my husband from the US, and none of us had ever lived outside the US before. Actually, that's not true. My husband had lived outside the US before emigrating there in the late 70s. But as a family, we had not lived outside the US. So my older son started high school here at one of the international schools, and has had a good experience. Obviously, this year of COVID has been different than we anticipated, but they're really integrating well into life here in Vienna. And one of the things I appreciate the most for them is that it is a very safe city. The public transportation is excellent. It's on time. It's there when you expect it. And so they've had a lot more freedom than they would have experienced in the same time frame in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So I do think that that has been a real learning and growing experience for the kids. And I'd say for myself, again, there are colleagues from everywhere, families from all over the place. And just last night, as part of the hiking club, which is one of the many clubs that they offer here at the Vienna International Center, I was able to go on a hike just outside in the Vienna woods with about 20 various colleagues from around the Vic, and have a lovely evening out in the fresh air. And so the emphasis on outdoor activities and biking is something that I really appreciate for myself here in Vienna.
Wonderful. Sounds very well-rounded. How about you, Alex Enders? What's your experience been?
Yeah, everything that Lisa said and was said before, that there's a lot of good reasons why Vienna is consistently ranked #1 in the world as the best city to live in. This was by far the best thing I could have done for my family. I brought with me a wife, and I have 2 daughters. They're now ages 6 and 9, and the ability to give them the cultural experience outside of East Tennessee has been mind-blowing. They both speak German now. They're actually in a German-speaking camp this week, and they've been exposed to an array of cultures that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. My wife enjoys it here very much. She's also taking German classes and doing a lot of running and taking care of the kids. She does not work. It is difficult, but not impossible for spouses to work. And the IAEA has in many cases been able to find work for a spouse. No guarantees there, but it can happen. So just something to consider. But Vienna is an awesome city to live in. The public transportation is spectacular, and the weather is actually not that bad, especially today.
Great, thanks. And how about you, Andrew?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a recurring theme amongst us panelists. My short spiel is that Vienna is fairly clean, fairly green, fairly safe, fairly easy to navigate. The salaries from the agency are very competitive compared to other industries in Vienna and are tax-free from Austria. So it's certainly easier to enjoy some of the high quality of life in the city and the area beyond. One thing that I will add is that one of the nice things about living in Vienna is that it does attract other people who also want that experience. And I'm not just referring to the staff here at the Vienna International Center, although the clubs and the opportunities from the Vienna-based organizations, as Lisa mentioned, are numerous. In my case, I moved here just myself as sort of a mid-career professional, and eventually wound up making some of my best friends here in the city outside of the Vic, with a group of cohorts that come from South Africa and Peru and Germany and Austria and Mexico. And it's this sort of international friendship group, which I could have never imagined being in Chicago or Chicago suburbs or Washington, D.C. So that's it from my side.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And how about you, Reagan?
Thanks, Janae. And at the risk of echoing every other panelist, I will just also say Vienna is the single best city I've ever lived in. So I mentioned before, I came to Vienna as a student, so I've gotten to see kind of 2 worlds of the city. The first as a graduate student at the Diplomatic Academy here, and then now as a young professional living in the city. And it has continued every year to surpass my expectations on what a city can offer. I'm a marathon runner, so I love the number of trails and it has green spaces everywhere. And in German, we say that Wien ist ein Dorf. Vienna is a village, and you truly get that feeling when you're walking around here. You constantly run into people you know, even colleagues who have just moved here. It feels like there's a small network around you at all times. And the last point I'll add is that you can use the IAEA's generous holiday leave to explore parts of the world that you might not have seen before. So currently I'm calling in from Tyrol using my generous holiday leave. And today I was able to summit a glacier and then run down in time to make this call. So it's really a great starting point for a lot of really amazing adventures that you might not have thought of before. So thanks, Janae.
Thank you, Reagan. So thank you, everyone. I think we have a little time for Q&A. If anyone has questions, I'll ask the IT people to read out the questions because I can't see it as I have my presentation up.
There are some questions. Do we want to leave them all for the Q&A at the end? And then Pedro will moderate this. Or do you prefer to take the questions now?
At the end of the second panel, do you mean?
Yes, at the end of the entire webinar.
We can do some questions now if you prefer. I don't mind. So we could we already have a couple of questions already, so I could read them aloud.
Yeah, I would do a couple with
as you prefer. Yeah.
A couple
Okay.
with the second
So
group.
we have a first question: how and when will the recorded sessions will be made available for review? So I believe we will pass the questions to you, Janae, and sorry, the recordings, and then you will distribute them among everyone there, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know when that will happen. Probably by next week. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll definitely get that out to everyone. Mm-hmm.
So we have another question. I would be curious to hear more about schools in Vienna, mostly elementary schools. Thank you. So I don't know if any of you, I don't have any kids, so I can't answer that question, unfortunately, but any of the panelists, if you want to answer that question.
Yeah, this is Alex. I have a kindergartner, a first grader, and a fourth grader now. I think I can answer that. There are a variety of very good elementary schools in the Vienna area, and they're international. So one of them is 2 metro stops away from the Vienna International Center, the Vienna International School. And there's also the American International School. And there's a whole bunch of other ones, of other, probably 5 or 6 other international schools in the city that have various focuses. So lots of options. And the IAEA will reimburse you for 75% of the tuition, I believe it is. So that covers most of the costs. The costs you have to pay out of pocket are quite reasonable, especially for the education that you get. Another option is, I know many colleagues have put their kids in the Viennese education system. So the kids learn German and the instruction is in German all day, every day. That is a great experience for kids if you choose to go that route. So the bottom line is there's a variety of options and all of them are good.
Great.
Yep. Thank you. So the next question is, I have a job at the national lab here in the US that I really love, but I'm interested in opportunities at the IAEA. In your opinion, is it better to just apply and see what happens, or to wait until I feel that a job change is due? Who would like to answer that question?
This is Lisa. I had a great job that I really enjoyed, great colleagues. And so my advice is always to myself and to my other colleagues, you should always look and see what's out there, because you never know when that perfect job is going to come up. And you at least want to have had the opportunity to interview for it and interview the colleagues that you would be working with. So I would say definitely start to look. And as you've heard, I didn't describe the timeline for my process, but the director position opened in October, and I started the following June. So it was a little bit shorter than was referenced before, but you've heard the 2-year timeline. So again, that would give you time to prepare and really time to think about what you wanted to do with your career. So my advice would, and that's just me, would be to at least explore, see what's out there, and then make a decision.
Great. All right, I don't hear any other questions. So I think we'll move forward.
There are a couple more, sorry.
There are? Okay, go ahead. I didn't hear
So
anything. So.
what was the typical time frame from when you first applied to when you interviewed to when you got an offer to when you started? So maybe I can answer this question. So the procedure, the recruitment procedure, it's quite bureaucratic and it takes a long time. It needs a lot of consultation and not a lot of endorsements at different levels. So it may take up to 8 months to 6 to 8 months for a recruitment to be finalized. And I have to say as well that we anticipate recruitments a lot. We actually sometimes we start the recruitment even 1 year before a vacancy is forecasted. So yeah, you need to count with at least 6 to 8 months to be from the moment you apply until you come on board. So that's something you should consider. Yeah. Okay, do you get additional job-specific training upon arrival at the IAEA? I don't know if any of you would like to answer that question.
Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit, Pedro.
Thank you.
So there is some orientation and job-specific training when you do arrive at the IAEA. This has gotten a lot better, especially in recent years with the MTHR's Learning and Development team. All new staff members will go through a half-day orientation program to learn certain key basics about the agency and certain policies and procedures. And then everyone gets a kind of orientation passport, if you will, and there's different individual modules. And the new staff members are encouraged to complete these individual modules, the ones of their choice, within a certain amount of time. Usually it's within the first 3 to 6 months at the agency. This is where I come in. So in my role as the training officer for the Incident and Emergency Center, I'm running one of these orientation modules about every 1 or 2 months to help explain who we are and what we do in the IEC to new staff members. As far as on-the-job training or specific job training, it really does depend on the department and the division. As Pedro mentioned, the HR process can take a little bit of time, and I think it's very rare for there to be a position that is sort of double encumbered, meaning that the current person is still in the role when the new person arrives. So working with the other colleagues in that division or department and understanding those processes is something that's a little bit unique, and I think it's different for each division and department, but it is there.
Okay, we have a number of questions, but I'm not sure we will have the time to answer all of them. Can you talk more about employment prospects for spouses? What do spouses typically do for work? Thank you. I can answer that question. It looks like this is a recurrent question. So the agency doesn't have specifically a spousal employment policy. However, there is a number of opportunities within the agency and also in many other international organizations and international companies in Vienna where spouses can apply and be considered. So you do not necessarily need to speak German to work in Vienna. But then, of course, it all depends as well on your spouse's background, because some backgrounds are more marketable than others, and it really takes it varies from couple to couple. But we just provide a little bit of advice, but there is no guarantee that your spouse is going to find a job here if you move here. Having said that, I would say that the compensation package of the IAEA is quite competitive and quite generous. So usually only when one of the partners is working is really enough for taking care of a household. So that would be my answer. Okay. I have a question here. Are the benefits for the cost-free expert similar to those discussed this week as an IAEA employee? They are actually exactly the same. So cost-free experts are considered full staff members, and the benefits are exactly the same as for staff members. Maybe a last question. For the panelists that had little to no background experience at specific fields of IAEA, what advice do you have to tailor the application so you stand out from the rest while still being a general specialist?
I'm happy.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. So this is Regan Almer speaking. I came to the IAEA not having worked at a UN organization before. So my advice would be to carefully read the job description, in that you will find the specific qualifications that are being looked for in this position, and make sure that you do match those qualifications. And tailor all of the material that you would then provide to fit this specific job application. And I apologize, I think another panelist had some more information to share.
Regan, this is Andrew. I was going to say exactly that, but also even if an applicant doesn't have IAEA experience or contact, I would offer to really highlight any international experience that you do have, not only because of the potential link to the agency, but also about working in a multicultural and international environment, which is exactly what we have here at the Vienna International Center. So that would be my small addition into the great advice that Regan just provided.
And I would add that our office at IAEA Programs, we can send you some tips for applying, and I'm happy to review your applications and give you some feedback. So you can email us at IAEAstaffing@ANL.gov for non-safeguards positions, and for safeguards, you can email us Steve Amundsen at BNL.gov.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can then pass to the second part of the presentation of the session. So Steve, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just start to share our screen here in a moment. Okay, I believe you can see my screen now, our presentation. Thank you very much, Pedro and others. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning into today's panel discussions, and good afternoon to our facilitators in Vienna. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's topic, the life about working at after working at the IAEA. Duke Kennedy of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC, Stu Magruder, also of the NRC, Didi McElroy of Los Alamos National Laboratory, and Stacy Mui of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I'm Steve Amundsen of the International Safeguards Project Office at Brookhaven National Lab. So Duke, Stu, and Stacy all were recently working at the IAEA in different roles and have now returned to the U.S. While Didi did not work at the IAEA herself, she and her office managed the assignments of Los Alamos employees to the IAEA, and she will be discussing IAEA assignments from a lab perspective and considerations for their employees. So I'd like to start very much as Janae did with her previous panel, discussing a professional path of our staff, or the people who went over on our panel. So I'd like to start with by asking Stacy, Stu, and Duke to describe what you were doing immediately prior to your IAEA assignment, how you got to the IAEA, what area you worked in at the agency, and what you're doing now. And Stacy, would you please go first?
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. So immediately prior to joining the IAEA, I was an employee at Sandia National Laboratories at the Livermore site. And my role there was I was a systems analyst working a variety of sort of national security problems. And I principally worked projects for the Department of Homeland Security's Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, which is now Counter WMD. And so in that role, I was responsible for performing analyses related to improving our efforts in detecting illicit nuclear and other radioactive materials, sort of crossing our borders or moving sort of illicitly within the country. In that role, I started out actually focused domestically, and then later in my career moved to doing supporting international engagements, both at the IAEA as well as through the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism. So in that capacity, I was able to support several IAEA training courses and workshops and consultancy meetings as a U.S. subject matter expert. And so that's, I guess, how I initially got introduced to the IAEA. And from 2014 to 2018, I became a staff member at the IAEA. I was a DHS-funded cost-free expert with a focus on detection of materials outside of regulatory control within the Division of Nuclear Security. And so it was sort of a very natural progression since I at least performed very similar functions in the U.S. and then also supported as a U.S. subject matter expert, and then later fulfilling that same sort of functional role, but from the Secretariat's point of view. In 2018, I actually returned back to the U.S. Into the laboratory system, but I actually made a decision to join a different laboratory. So now I'm at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And again, I'm focused on global security systems analysis. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thank you very much, Stacy. Stu, what about yourself?
Good morning and good afternoon. Excuse me. Actually, could you go to Duke first, and I'll come back? Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Duke?
Yeah, hello, everybody. So my name is Duke Kennedy, and prior to working at IAEA, I was a project manager at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, focusing mostly on licensing of research reactors. And I spent about 8 years doing that, really focused on license renewal reviews for all the U.S. research reactors at universities and a couple in parts of the government. And in that job, back in 2007, I started shadowing another member of our group who was working with IAEA and who had actually been a cost-free expert himself before that. And so I got my first exposure going to IAEA's big International Research Reactor Conference in Sydney in 2007. And from there, I started working with IAEA as an expert to support some of their workshops, regional workshops, and also as a representative of the NRC in research reactor-related safety meetings. And so that's how I got my exposure to the IAEA, and I decided that it was something I really enjoyed. And a position became open in 2012, and I applied for that as a nuclear safety officer in the research reactor safety section in the Division of Nuclear Installation Safety. And that, I think I finished the application in July, and I was in Vienna the following April. So in that role, I've participated in activities related to the IAEA safety standards on the safety of research reactors, worked developing tech docs on various topics, worked with coordinated research projects, of course, supported safety and peer review missions to regulatory bodies and to reactors all over the world. organized meetings in Vienna, various topics on research reactor safety, and also meetings in other countries. And I also had an opportunity to participate in some more division level activities. Actually, Stu and I worked together on a few of the division level activities, including the nuclear safety review, which was an annual report, and also a report called the Omnibus report. So that was really interesting to get an exposure to all of the different activities going on in the division. I returned to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 2018 in May, and it was a bit of a time warp because I went right back to the same position as a project manager. The work focus had shifted a little bit. Most of the license renewals were done, but actually I think 90% of the people in the branch were the same. The supervisor was the same, so it was actually a very simple transition to come right back into the same position. I did have a few opportunities based on the international experience after coming back. So I was member of a couple working groups that were focused on international work and also taking maximum advantage of people's international expertise after they had returned to NRC. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Stu, how's your throat feeling now?
Much better, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No
and
problem.
good morning and good afternoon to everybody again. I had a slightly different path than Stacy and Duke. I had been at the NRC for about 25 years, doing various jobs from inspector to project manager to supervisor, several different roles. And I wasn't really thinking about going overseas. I had a little bit of experience with the IAEA, going to consultancy meetings and things like that. But the role that I had just prior to going to the IAEA, I was a branch chief, so a first level supervisor at the NRC in our new reactors office, and we were focusing on preparing to license the new small modular reactor designs. And we quickly realized that small modular reactors, or SMRs, potential to be deployed to a lot of countries. And we had started discussions with other regulators about how to regulate SMRs, how they're different from the large light water reactors that we're used to dealing with. And so we I started going to Vienna for meetings to talk about SMRs, met with other regulators, and the NRC management started thinking maybe we should propose that there be a forum of regulators who were dealing with SMRs, so we could start sharing ideas. And maybe we could support a cost-free expert. So we actually, initially, the first call was to the NEA in Paris, actually, because I think the NRC deals more frequently in some aspects with the NEA, at least for nuclear safety. The NEA said, no, we're not interested. We called the IAEA and they said, yeah, that sounds great. So the NRC actually created or sent the money to the IAEA to create a CFE position there to specifically focus on small modular reactors. I was not even thinking about applying at the time. My boss, Mike Mayfield, said, hey, why don't you write up the position description for this job over there? And while I was doing that, I kind of thought, well, why not do it now? Our kids were either working or away at college. It was just my wife and I, and we said, let's try to take this opportunity. If we don't do it now, we probably will never do it. So I applied through the NRC. The NRC was actually the one that made the selection, and then I started well, actually, I should say this all happened during the summer of 2014, I guess. I was selected by the NRC in the fall of 2014, and I end up starting at the IAEA in March of 2015. So it was a shorter process, I think, probably because it was a CFE and the NRC had done the selection. And as Duke said, I was in the we were in the division of nuclear installation safety in the nuclear safety and security department, and I really enjoyed my time over there. Did a lot more than just SMR stuff, and I'd be obviously share some more of that as we go through the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stu. All right. Now, looking back, I can imagine there were a lot of things that maybe each of you had wished you had done before you went over to Vienna that would have made things easier, or things that you actually did do that you're glad you did. Stu or Duke, would either of you have an example of something like that?
Yeah, sure. This is Duke. I'll go. So I think one thing that's kind of come up in the questions is that before you go to Vienna, you need to make a plan for what you really want to take out of it and what you want to be doing there. So that should include, like, what if you're going with a spouse, what's their plan for keeping busy in Vienna? And there are a lot of great options, some that were mentioned. One I can share personally is my wife got a master's degree at the University of Vienna, and I think it cost her about $2,000 for the whole program. And also, you know, how long do you really want to stay? If you're going to have an option to extend your contract, would you plan to do that? Just to make sure that you have your own expectations and your family understands what's happening and NRC understands what's happening as best they can. Plans can always change, but I thought that was important. We also got a fully furnished apartment there for 1 month, so that we had time to look for other housing. That was very useful. And I took the opportunity when I was in Vienna about a year before we moved there to go scope out neighborhoods, because I thought there was a real possibility that we would be moving there, and I wanted to get a sense for, you know, what is the city like. Often when you go to Vienna for a meeting, you're in the first district, in the tourist area, or you're out at the Vienna International Center. So I took some time to just take the U-Bahn all over the place and get off and walk around, see what the neighborhoods were like. So, Stu?
Yeah, I agree with Duke. I guess professionally, I wish I had become more familiar with the IAEA standards and the supporting documents. I was familiar with some of them, but I really didn't understand the breadth and the scope of all of the documents that existed already. So often, especially talking with European colleagues who use them much more frequently than we do in the US, I would find myself kind of scrambling to figure out what they were talking about. So learning about the safety standards and the supporting documents beforehand would have been helpful for me. Personally or practically, I think I wish I had tried to learn German before I went over, or at least got a head start. I mean, I tried a little bit when I was there, but it wasn't really successful, and it would have been helpful. Although, as you know, everybody has said previously, it's not essential. It's really helpful, especially dealing with non-professionals in Vienna. So that would have been nice. One practical thing that maybe a detail, but I was surprised when I got to Vienna that the security deposit for apartments are generally 3 months worth of security deposit. So it's much more than you used to. And you have to make sure that you have that cash in a US bank account that you can wire to Vienna, immediately upon deciding you want an apartment. So that's just kind of one of the little things to think about. I have to say the Vic housing office and the people who do transportation and storage and stuff like that were fantastic to work with. So I would highly recommend coordinating with them before you start your move.
Great. Thank you very much, Stu. Stacy, would you have anything else to add to that?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think in hindsight, one thing I wish I did that I didn't do was actually bring my dog to Vienna. The Austrians, Viennese, they love animals. It's a very dog-friendly city, and you know, there's plenty of opportunities for dog walkers, dog sitters if you go on duty travel. And so that's probably my one regret for my time in Vienna. I think the comment just now about be prepared for high upfront expenses with respect to housing. I actually didn't go through the UN housing website. I just actually couldn't get it to work when I made my transition. So I found my apartment just through, I think, the local newspaper. And so I think if you go that route, you have to be prepared to work with colleagues or with a network to get that lease translated from German into English if you do, or if you're not fluent. And I would say be prepared for, or don't be surprised for there to be no light fixtures in an apartment you move into. So this was it was a different experience as I was viewing different apartments to just go into a place and see exposed wires, because it just was not what I was used to moving from California. And so you would have to, you know, obviously install it yourself or find an electrician. And so I think that was a bit of a shock and something to be prepared for. On a professional note, I would say one of the best pieces of advice that I got before transitioning to the IAEA was related to the role change. And this is particularly important if you supported IAEA events as a U.S. subject matter expert, because fundamentally your role changes when you become part of the Secretariat. And so my mentor at the time at the IAEA sat me down and said, well, you are now a member of the Secretariat. Your job is not to provide the U.S. perspective anymore. Your job is really to facilitate the good practices of member states. Like, that's fundamentally the role of the Secretariat. Or if you're leading a training mission, it's to ensure your experts, your international experts, are in line with IAEA guidance and standards. And so the role changes, and I think it could be a trap for those that are used to the U.S. subject matter expertise side of things. And so getting in the right mindset that fundamentally you're in a different role, I think is really important before you make that transition.
Yeah, that's excellent advice, Stacey. That is very, very true. So I know some people do sometimes have trouble with that transition. So, by the way, what did you do with your dog for 3.5 years?
He actually went to my parents, and he is still my parents' dog at this point.
That's how it works always. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for the contributions. Now, moving on. Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to emphasize one thing that Stu said about getting familiar with the job before you go and learning the safety standards. And it relates back to a question from the last panel discussion about what kind of training you'll get when you get there. And you really need to be mentally prepared to be dropped into the job and expected to be fully functional from day one. There's not any kind of hand-holding or any kind of training program that's going to get you up to speed on everything. You really need to take it on yourself. Of course, there's a lot of support from the colleagues you're working with, but when you arrive in Vienna, you're expected to be a fully functional expert in the area you're working in. So it's something that's a little bit different than when you are at NRC and you have these big training programs and qualifications. There's none of that at IAEA. You're just expected to be ready to go.
Parachuted in and ready to go. So, all right, thank you for that contribution to it. All right, now, so moving on here, some of you might know, I actually lived in Vienna for nearly 10 years and worked there at the agency for just about as long. So, and I remember when I moved back to the United States after that amount of time there were so many things I had to get in order before my family and I could move. Not to mention eventually finding a place to live for all of us because we didn't have a house we were coming back to. I went over there with just myself, came back with a wife and 2 kids. So it was a very different situation for me personally when I moved back to the United States. So looking back yourselves, everyone, where were things that helped, what were some things that helped ease you with the transition back to the United States? And what advice would you give to everyone? Stacy, would you start?
Sure. I'm going to sort of bid my response into sort of professional and personal. I think on the professional front, reintegration often involves sort of a reinvestigation, right, for national security clearances. And so it's really important during your time at the IAEA to keep accurate records of travel, both what you've done for professional reasons as well as sort of personal reasons. And as part of those records, keeping track of what travel document you traveled on. So as a staff member, you'll often travel on a UN laissez-passer. And when you sever from the agency, you have, or at least when I severed, there was an option to basically keep the canceled travel documents as a souvenir. And so I would encourage everybody to do that, because when I went through reinvestigation, like the investigators actually wanted to look at that travel document and to look at all of the stamps in that document, as well as sort of keeping track of any sort of close interactions and participants that you might have worked with, because that's going to be needed when you reintegrate. Similar to what I mentioned before about that role change and changing that mindset, I think it's going to be the same when you return. It's certainly the same when you return. I think the previous panel, someone mentioned you have a lot of autonomy and independence when you are a technical officer at the IAEA. I think when you return back, depending on your role at the lab or in federal government, I hate to say it, but you're another cog in the wheel, and that could be a pretty big adjustment, getting used to that again. And so just getting into the right mindset. On a personal level, some of the closeout procedures of leaving Vienna I thought were challenging. So for example, canceling any contracts, whether that's your rental lease agreement, your cell phone, your internet, you need 3 months written notice to the company. And so that, again, sometimes you might not have that much notice when your contract ends, especially if you think you're getting extended. And so that could be a challenge. As well as, I think, on a personal level, bank accounts. So I would encourage you to keep your Austria bank account open for a few months for any sort of lingering bills that have to be paid out. And then having, so I personally had also a UN Federal Credit Union account, which is actually a US bank, and you're able to transfer funds between your Bank Austria account and that sort of UN credit union account when you finally close out your bank account. So I found that pretty helpful, and it does, you're not charged a fee for that transfer. It's just basically the currency conversion. And so, yeah, those are probably my biggest tips.
And also I want to add about the United Nations Federal Credit Union. If you do have the account and you leave the United Nations, leave the IAEA, you're still able to keep that. After 6.5 years, I still have my UNFCU accounts. I still use them. Stu or Duke, would you have anything else to add?
So this is Stu. I'll go next.
Go ahead, Stu. Go ahead, Stu.
So I will echo and emphasize Stacy's point about keeping records, about where you go, who you meet, why you travel. You'll need all that stuff for your security reinvestigation, and it can be time consuming to fill all that out. Keep both your professional travel and your personal travel. It's important to do that. The professional is a little bit easier because of the the system in at the IAEA for travel. But anyway, it's all important. I think communicating back with your home office, whether it's a lab or the NRC in my case, is really important to kind of make sure that people remember who you are, so that when you say, hey, I want to come back to work, people will remember you, and you know, it's much easier to kind of figure out where you're going to go in the organization when you get back. Plus, it's also helpful to keep up with the U.S. position on issues. As I think Stacy said, and it's really a good point, that when you get to the IAEA, you're not representing the U.S. position anymore. You are kind of a facilitator, a mediator, but understanding what the U.S. positions are is really helpful in your discussions with others. And often, kind of offline, you'll be asked, what does the NRC think about this? And so it's important to communicate with people, so what their positions are. And it helps, as I said, when you transition back. So that's kind of professionally. I'll also divide it up into professional and personal. Personally, again, what Stacy said about giving written notice to the various entities in Austria that you're going to leave. You can't just walk into the T-Mobile store and say, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going to stop my contract now. We found out you need months of warning in advance. And even simple things like, think about like we had a Yaris card, the pass for all public transportation in Vienna, and it was something that we had automatically renewed through our Bank Austria account, so that you get you buy a yearly pass and it automatically renews. So we left Vienna in October of 2018. And our cards didn't expire until May of 2019. And so we didn't think anything of it. We thought when our cards expire, that's it. But it turns out that because we didn't officially write to the transportation people, they sent us a bill in May of the following year asking why we were not paying for the next year and why our Bank Austria account was closed. So there's lots of little things like that, but in general, it's manageable. It's just you have to think about those things. So Duke, I'm sorry I cut you off earlier.
No, that's fine. So one thing for me that kind of maybe surprised me, or I wasn't fully prepared for, is that when you leave Vienna, you will miss it. And even if you've lived there for 5 years and you've done all the annual festivals every year and you've traveled a lot and things are kind of feeling like normal life there, you will miss it when you leave. And so I would encourage you to do all the things that you enjoyed most about Vienna one last time. Also, I think getting started on the IAEA's separation checklist as early as you can helps you to understand a lot of the responsibilities for getting everything closed. And actually the HR department there is pretty helpful about guiding you through that. And then also to get back in touch with all your personal contacts in the US if there are people that you haven't been in touch with as much while you're in Vienna, to start working early to reestablish those personal contacts as well, because when you move back, it'll be nice to have that support network and just to get back in touch with people. I personally don't use any social media, so I do everything by telephone and email. So maybe people who are on social media keep that connection going better while they're there. But for me, it was useful to establish some of the connections or strengthen them before I went back. Thanks.
Thank you very much, guys. And Stacy, I think the hardest transition for me personally was going from the nice Austrian coffees to filtered American style coffees. That was the toughest part. Anyways, so moving on. So some of our audience today are employees of national labs, some of which are shown here. So if you're considering going to Vienna and leaving your lab, I can tell you that there is really no overarching DOA policy that's adhered to by the labs for their employees taking a leave of absence to go to the IAEA. So each lab has its own set of rules and procedures in place, which you should definitely look into before considering or applying to IAEA positions to make sure that they're in line with what your desires are. Stacy, so you had mentioned earlier that you had started at one lab, I believe you said Sandia with their Lawrence Livermore site in California, but then you went to the IAEA, but then you went to a different lab. So from that experience going from one lab to the agency and to a different lab, what are some things you would advise people to consider?
Yeah, so when I went to the IAEA, I was an employee at Sandia National Laboratories. And so I actually had return rights to go back to Sandia. I was on a special leave of absence to, temporarily become an international civil servant. And in that respect, the system that Sandia set up was really quite good. When I made the decision to reintegrate back into the U.S., because I want to touch on this because I see a question in the Q&A panel, is that I found my experience at the IAEA opened up a lot of doors for me professionally within the field of nuclear security, not just because of all of the regions you get to work in, your expansive international network, broad exposure to sort of USG stakeholders that work in the field. So when I reintegrated back, I actually had the opportunity to either federalize or sort of go back to Sandia or join a different laboratory. And it's all about, life's about trade-offs, basically. So when I decided to join Livermore, as opposed to going back to Sandia, for me, the decision-making was the opportunity at Livermore was basically leveraging my experience at the IAEA, whereas I personally felt like if I rejoined Sandia, it was going to be, rewinding the clock 4 years and doing exactly what I did, the same role that I had prior to this great professional experience at the IAEA. But that did come with trade-offs. And so, years of service sort of accrual, since I didn't return to Sandia, my time at IAEA actually didn't count against my Sandia pension, which really wasn't that big of a deal because as a cost-free expert, there are other pension options or other retirement options while you're at the IAEA. I think one of the other big challenges or considerations rather, when you reintegrate, and if you try to find a new job, depending on what state you live in the U.S., depending on the employment laws, if you have to say what your previous salary was or is, that could be a challenge because IAEA listed salaries, although the total benefit package in terms of you don't pay U.S. taxes, you get a housing subsidy, generous leave policy, the total compensation package is really, really generous at the IAEA. But in terms of pure salary, if what you list is not really competitive to most listed U.S. salaries, and that could be a challenge if you try to re-enter into the job market in a state in which employers are allowed to ask that question. But that's been my personal experience. I personally wouldn't worry about return options. I would sort of keep an open mind because I think you're going to grow a lot personally and professionally through your time at the IAEA, and so I wouldn't want to be self-limiting when you start to think about reintegrating back to the U.S.
Great, thank you very much, Stacy. It's a very good perspective from going from one lab to another, and things that need to be taken into consideration for that. All right, so now I'm moving on to our next slide here is speaking about Los Alamos National Laboratory. And this is not from an IAEA ex-staff member perspective, but from the lab itself. So Los Alamos probably has more of their employees at the IAEA, and I believe than any other lab. So Didi, I imagine you've been assisting most of them over the years. And could you describe your lab's activities when it comes to the assignments at the IAEA? So this is not just this is mostly applicable just to your lab, but it could be for others as well. DD, you still with us?
Maybe the microphone is muted, so. Or maybe we've lost him.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. We will just move on for a moment to then our next
Okay.
slide. Maybe Dee will be able to. We'll get her back on there in a minute. We will come back to her. So now I want to also speak about the experience of Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the NRC. So Stu and Duke are our two gentlemen from the NRC. What kind of advice would you give to listeners that are listening from the NRC? That I believe there are many of them.
Well, this is Duke.
Yeah, go ahead and start, Duke. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, can you bring up the first bullet there, please, Steve? Yeah, so this is very important to communicate early and often. In my experience, I kept in touch with my first line supervisor pretty well the whole 5 years that I was there, and also division level management. So I would call my supervisor and talk about what work I was doing, and you know, what could he share with me from what was going on back home. And of course, you have to be a little sensitive because you're not an NRC employee anymore, so you can't necessarily hear about non-public things that are going on, and you can't talk about things that would be considered privileged information you gained at IAEA. But to keep in touch so that NRC understands how you're developing professionally, what skills you're picking up, and where you might be able to integrate or reintegrate best when it's time to return. You want to add some things too?
So this, yeah, the benefit specialist. Actually, if you could bring up all of the bullets on the slide, Steve, I think that would be great. Yeah. So the idea of talking to your benefit specialist for the NRC, this is our HR department is called the Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer, which is a mouthful, but they have great experts who can explain, you know, what benefits you have now. If you want to come back to the NRC, they kind of explain your reemployment rights. You know, the fact that you can be gone up to 5 years and still be entitled to an equivalent job when you come back. So understanding that, but also practical things like health insurance, retirement plans, whether your service time will continue, and generally it doesn't, depending on the retirement plan. So talking with the benefit specialist before you go, while you're over there, you know, remember you'll still be required to pay Social Security taxes and your Medicare tax, and if you, depending on you know what you do for retirement or health benefits, you may be doing that. So understanding when you're going to get billed and how to pay those bills, and then of course when you transition back to the NRC, there's all kinds of paperwork you have to fill out, and so working with the HR folks, and as I mentioned earlier, you know, the folks that you work with in your office. So Duke, I'll let you take it next to cover the next few things here.
Okay, thanks. So in my case, I went originally for 3 years, and that was offered an extension to 5 years by the IAEA. And this is something that you need to be aware of and make sure that you communicate back to NRC, and don't accept any extensions or contract changes without talking to NRC first. And when it's time to come back, really try to be as proactive as you can in the process, and get engaged early. I got great support from NRC HR, but I did have to send a lot of emails and ask a lot of questions, and I got answers to all my questions. But I think if I hadn't reached out for all that information, I wouldn't have just naturally got it. So the point is that if you have any uncertainty or any questions, get in touch with your HR specialist, but give them enough time to do their job, because as everyone knows, there's a lot of people involved and rules involved in HR policy. So sometimes getting answers, it just takes a lot of time. So make sure you give NRC enough time to be responsive. In terms of keeping good records, I think we heard a lot about keeping travel records. Personally, when I filled out my security clearance forms, I think I had to enter 70 or 80 separate travels in there, and it's not a quick process. And I think I entered over 1,000 names of individuals that I met in my various meetings and professional activities. So for me, I kept all my meeting reports and mission reports so that I could copy and paste the attendance lists into the security clearance information. So I made sure that every foreign national that I interacted with was in my security paperwork. Maybe that was overkill, but at least I was thorough, and didn't result in any questions. Also, one thing that I made a mistake on is that I, for some reason, thought it was good enough just to have my US passport when I returned, and some of my other proof of identity documentation got packed away in my shipping container. As a result, I wasn't actually able to get an NRC badge until my shipping container arrived and I could get my birth certificate out of the shipping container. So for 6 weeks, I had to check as a visitor every day, and that was kind of a pain. So make sure that you understand all the records that you'll need when you return to go through all the NRC processes, and don't let them accidentally get packed away. So Stu, you want to hit the next one?
Yeah, so the safety attaché to the U.S. mission in Vienna is a position that's filled by an NRC employee. I think they transfer to become a State Department employee when they're in Vienna, but then they come back to the NRC, and that's an important role. That person is responsible for kind of keeping the U.S. ambassador to the mission in Vienna informed of things that are happening at the IAEA. And I found that was really helpful to meet with them regularly, to kind of find out what the U.S. government positions were on issues, to find out what else was going on. And they also wanted to know what was happening from my perspective anyway at the IAEA. So I thought that was really useful, and I would encourage people to do that, to kind of broaden your perspective on things. And also the final bullet here is, meet with the NRC staff and when they come to Vienna. They'll likely reach out to you, and I have to say the NRC Office of International Programs is really good about reaching out to kind of coordinate things. They would often facilitate dinners or lunches, or at the very least coffees, as you've heard from others. Coffee is a big thing. And it's really nice to sit down with folks and just relax and drink some coffee and chat Vienna. So that was really important. Again, it's good to know what's going on at the NRC, and gives you an opportunity to fill them in on things, so they have a better perspective when they're attending meetings there about what's going on, kind of some of the background, and maybe some of the kind of political or diplomatic aspects of some things there. So I thought that was very helpful, and it's also kind of nice to be able to reconnect with with old friends when they come over to visit in Vienna.
Yeah, you're not going to be on an island when you're working at the IAEA. You have plenty of interactions, opportunities for interactions with colleagues and working at the same organizations or other labs that are coming to Vienna for meetings. The U.S. mission in Vienna has an attaché for safety, security, energy, the safeguards liaison from our office at Brookhaven. So there's plenty of opportunities to chat with other people that still has a connection back with the U.S. government or the labs for while you're working in Vienna. You're not going to be, as I said, on an island while you're working there. So, okay, thanks very much for that contribution, gentlemen. We'll try Didi one more time to see if you're still able to get access. Looks like we're having a little technical difficulty there with that. Okay, so I'm going to then move on here. For any of our listeners who would like to follow up with myself, Janae, or any of our panelists, here is our contact information at Argonne National Lab and Brookhaven National Lab. I think most of you also had my work email address from emails I sent out prior to this workshop, so you're more than welcome to contact me if you'd like to get in contact directly with any of our panelists. And if now I'll move on to our next Q&A part of the presentation. I think I'll hand back the floor to Pedro from the IAEA.
Thank you. So please, again, use the question and answer function in WebEx, please. We have already a couple of questions. I will read them aloud. So if you return without return rights to a job, how did finding a job to come back to go? Any advice?
Did any of our panelists have that case? I don't think it was the case where everybody did have reemployment rights from where they left.
Yeah, this is Stu. I think Stacy covered it pretty well, actually, in her discussions. I think it does broaden your experience. Obviously, makes you. I think it makes you more attractive as an employee, and I think it opens up opportunities. But Stacy, you're probably the best to answer this with your background.
Sure. So I did have return rights. I opted to not exercise those rights, I suppose. So I guess the advice here would be, like anything, start early, because just like transitioning to the IAEA, that could be a year-long process. I think finding the right opportunity can also be, a year-long process as well. I think if you apply for new positions, especially within sort of national security, one of the challenges is also related to sort of like mandatory, like drug test screening, for example. And so I had to time some of that to when I happened to be back in the U.S., on home leave or visiting families, because there just wasn't a testing option in Vienna. So to just be aware of that. I think as people have mentioned, trying to stay connected with, I guess, key stakeholders in your field or in your functional area as they, go on TDY to Vienna, or even when you return back to the U.S. on home leave. I think trying to keep those connections going is really important. But again, for me, I personally found that I had more opportunities reintegrating back to the U.S. than I would have thought when I left. So I didn't really find it a challenge at all.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, if I could add one
Please
more
go
point.
ahead. Yes, sure.
I think one thing, especially if you're someone that's coming from a technical field, let's say from a laboratory setting, thinking carefully about, especially if your role at the IAEA is not necessarily in a technical capacity, thinking about how you communicate the benefit of that experience and what sort of additional skills you bring to the table, I think is really important. And that was partly a little bit of a challenge for me when I reintegrated back, coming from a very sort of technical analytical group. And the 4 years I spent at the IAEA, I wasn't really doing analyses per se. And so that crafting that message might take some time, but I do think the benefits sort of outweigh the risk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next question is, did you experience any loyalty or security conflicts as a result of working for the US government and then IAEA?
So this is Duke. I'll take a first stab at this one. So I didn't have any issues with security conflicts. I traveled to a number of countries that you normally wouldn't be able to as a US citizen. And I put all that information on my security clearance and I got no questions about it. So I didn't find any issues there. I didn't find any issues traveling to any countries where I felt like I was being, targeted or treated differently because I happened to be a U.S. citizen. I always felt safe and comfortable with the people that I was working with internationally. And in terms of loyalty issues, I think this has kind of been covered, that when you're at IAEA, you're representing the IAEA and you put your nationality in the background and really represent the IAEA. So that's my contribution.
And this is Stacey.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
I had a very similar experience. I traveled to some countries that might have been challenging if I was traveling for the U.S. on those missions. And again, keeping accurate records, ensuring there are maybe people that could attest to why I was there on mission, I think was important for my sort of reinvestigation. But again, I think when you're on mission representing the IAEA, as was just mentioned, you're no longer representing the U.S. You're traveling on a UN travel document, and so I didn't really face sort of any negative experience on either side of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. Is quantitative risk analysis, PRA, being increasingly used at the IAEA, whether in the reactor operations, materials, safeguards areas? That is an increasing trend in the NRC, but I'm curious if that is the case in the IAEA. Thank you for the great panel. I'm not so sure who would be in the best position to answer this question.
So this is Stu Magruder. I'll take a shot at that, Pedro. Right? The answer is, the answer is yes, emphatically. PRA or PSA, as it's known globally, probabilistic safety assessments are very much a part of the IAEA safety standards and safety work. Well, I can only speak from the nuclear installation safety point of view, which is power reactors and non-power research and test reactors. But it's very much used and appreciated. There are many meetings where they talk about techniques. There's, for example, there's an ongoing project on multi-unit PRAs that's really interesting, bringing together experts from around the world. There's a lot of discussion about seismic hazards, seismic margins, a lot of also interesting work with regard to HRA, human reliability analysis, lots of international discussions about that. So it's yes, definitely it's being used. And if you have experience in that area and there's a position open, I would encourage you to emphasize that.
Yeah, this is Duke. I'll just add very briefly that PRA is not typically something that's been done for research reactors in the United States, and it is getting attention and has for quite a while in other countries. And IAEA has been looking to see if it's possible to expand the use of PRA in research reactors. So I think the trend in all nuclear installation safety activities is to expand the use of it and continue, try to continue expanding the use of it.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe we do not have any further questions. So I don't know if Steve or Janae, would you like to add anything else?
Nothing else to add besides a big thank you to all of you at the agency, Pedro, Siori, who is not online, Christine Sim, the recruitment head, Neva, who facilitated earlier in this week, Jack as well, your support from Laura, Luca, and Kay, and also a thank you to Rula, who will be closing us out. I'd like to thank all of you for helping facilitate this for us.
Okay, thank you as well. I believe Rula wanted to add some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you.
Rula, please.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. So this brings us to the end of the web seminar this week, and we hope that you found the last 3 days useful for you and a good learning experience. Those who were with us for the 3 days, you know that we gave you an overview of the IAEA and what we do and the benefits and entitlements that we offer during day 1. Day 2 was dedicated to introduce you to the recruitment process at the IAEA. And today you heard the experiences of US nationals working at the IAEA and also at the US National Labs and Regulatory Commission. I want to thank all our panelists for sharing their experiences. This was very much appreciated. And I hope that the audience benefits from what you found out and what you shared based on your experience. I want to add that the IAEA's recruitment process is a highly competitive one. I heard several questions around the time that it takes and the opportunities and when best to apply and how early to start and so on. As it is really a competitive process, it does take time. Don't be discouraged if you apply once or twice and you're not successful. Please continue to check our employment web page for suitable open vacancies. And I wish you all the best in your application process if you are interested in working for the IAEA. And I again want to thank our organizer and our co-facilitators on the US side, Spencer Fields from the US Mission in Vienna, Steve Amundsen, thank you very much, and Janae Armstrong for your co-facilitation. And I know that some of you will continue your learning journey with us next week. So we look forward to seeing you then. And I wish you again all the best and say goodbye for now and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, take care.